welcome to the deep dive. And right off the bat, may God bless your day and the week ahead of you.
Yes, absolutely.
So today our mission is to unpack one of the most, truly pivotal and disruptive moments in ancient history.
Oh, without a doubt.
We're talking about the sudden emergence of John the Baptist out in the Judean desert.
Right.
And of course, that builds up to the highly devoted baptism of Jesus. But we're actually setting out to solve a much broader historical mystery today, too.
Yeah, a really fascinating one.
Because if you regularly read ancient historical texts, or, specifically the four Gospels, you inevitably notice that the accounts of these massive events, well, they sometimes seem to disagree on the details.
They do.
So we're going to look at exactly why those differences exist, which honestly requires a complete shift in how modern readers approach ancient documents.
It's a total paradigm shift.
To guide us through this, we're pulling from the comprehensive study notes in the Holman and NAA Study Bibles, focusing really heavily on Matthew chapter 3. And to build our analytical framework, we're looking at a brilliant essay by Robert H. Stein. It's called Differences in the Gospels.
It's a great piece.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
Because before we wade into the muddy waters of the Jordan River, we have to establish how these ancient texts were actually put together.
Right, the construction of the text itself.
Exactly. Because the friction point for so many readers comparing Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is the discrepancies. The timelines shift around, the word counts vary wildly, and certain figures just appear or disappear depending on who's writing.
What's fascinating here is Stein's core concept. He points out that the gospel writers operated as inspired interpreters, not literal stenographers.
Interpreters, not stenographers.
Right, because when a modern reader, when you pick up a transcript of a political speech today or a court proceeding, your baseline expectation is a word-for-word, rigorously chronological recording.
Yeah, like a security camera transcript.
Exactly. But applying that modern, highly rigid framework to a first-century text is a fundamental historical anachronism. Ancient audiences just didn't expect or demand chronological stenography.
They didn't even have a concept for it, really.
No, they didn't. Stein actually points to a second-century figure named Papias. Papias was an early church leader who documented how these texts were viewed right after they were written.
Okay.
And Papias wrote that Mark recorded the teachings of Peter with incredibly high accuracy, but he explicitly noted that Mark intentionally did not arrange the events in chronological order.
Wow. Intentionally.
Yes. The writers of that era arranged their material topically, logically, and geographically. They did it to highlight specific theological arguments rather than strictly sequential timelines.
Our sources actually provide a really tangible example of this, the story of the centurion's servant.
Oh, that's a perfect example.
Yeah, so in the Gospel of Luke, the narrative spans about 186 words. Luke includes this specific detail that the centurion sends Jewish elders to act as intermediaries to speak to Jesus for him. But then, you look at Matthew's account of the exact same event, and the narrative is compressed way down to just 103 words.
He trims it right down.
Matthew entirely omits the Jewish elders. The text reads as though the centurion and Jesus are having a direct, face-to-face conversation.
Which a modern analytical approach might immediately flag as a historical contradiction.
Right, like somebody is lying.
But Stein uses this analogy of a modern journalist to explain Matthew's editorial process, and the journalistic parallel is incredibly helpful.
How so?
Well, consider how global news is reported today. A journalist might write, "The president told the prime minister that trade negotiations must continue."
Sure.
But it is highly unlikely those two leaders stood alone in an empty room and spoke directly to each other without aides, ambassadors, translators.
Oh, right. There's a whole entourage.
Exactly. The journalist simply bypasses the minor intermediaries to get straight to the essential communication between the primary figures. Matthew is utilizing that exact same editorial technique.
He's just getting straight to the point.
By abbreviating the narrative and cutting out the non-essential intermediaries, the elders, he sharpens your focus entirely on the interaction between Jesus and the centurion.
So from an ancient perspective, that's an intentional choice for narrative efficiency, not an error.
Exactly.
And that same literary framework applies to the timeline discrepancies too, right? Like the timing of the crucifixion.
Oh, crucifixion timing is heavily scrutinized.
Right, because Mark's gospel places the event at the third hour, which is 9:00 a.m. But John's gospel says it occurred at about the 6th hour, which is noon.
Yeah.
I mean, a 3-hour gap in a modern police report would throw out the whole case.
It would. But this requires us to pull back and look at the technological context of the first century. Ancient timekeeping was inherently imprecise.
They didn't have Apple Watches.
Right. Society operated without mechanical clocks. The day was divided into broad 3-hour quadrants, the 3rd hour, the 6th hour, the 9th hour.
Just estimating by the sun.
Exactly. So if an event took place somewhere in the middle of those quadrants, say around 10:30 in the morning,
Oh, I see.
it could legitimately and accurately be recorded by one observer as the 3rd hour and by another observer as the 6th hour. Both writers are operating perfectly within the accepted cultural conventions of their era.
Okay, so beyond chronological formatting and narrative compression, Stein also points out how the authors handled translation, like translating Jesus' actual teachings.
Yes, the thought-for-thought translation.
Right, a prime example being the Beatitudes. Luke's text reads, "Blessed are the poor." There's a very literal, direct translation.
Word for word.
But Matthew's text reads, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." So Matthew takes on the role of a thought-for-thought translator here.
He adds that explanatory phrase to ensure his specific audience understands the underlying Aramaic meaning.
Right, clarifying that it's about spiritual humility, not just strict economic poverty.
That addition is a perfect demonstration of the interpreter concept. Matthew isn't altering the core truth of the statement. He's expanding the Greek phrasing to capture the full weight of the original spoken concept.
And for you, as a reader diving into these ancient histories, keeping this framework active is absolutely essential. You can't expect modern, chronological, word-for-word transcripts. That's just the wrong framework.
They organized by theme, theology, and geography. They were curators, not just compiling sterile logs.
So with that framework established, let's look at the actual narrative of Matthew chapter 3.
The desert.
Yes, the Judean desert, early 1st century. It's harsh, arid, totally isolated. And out of this landscape emerges John the Baptist.
Such a disruptive figure.
Incredibly disruptive. And his physical appearance is as jarring as his location. The text notes his wild aesthetic. He's wearing a garment woven from camel hair, secured by a thick leather belt, and his diet consists entirely of locusts and wild honey.
The diet definitely catches modern readers off guard.
Yeah, it sounds like a survival show stunt.
It does, but the study notes provide important context here. Consuming locusts was not a bizarre performative stunt. Insects were actually highly nutritious, and they were a readily available protein source for the poorest classes in the Middle East.
Okay.
Furthermore, according to the ancient dietary laws in Leviticus chapter 11, locusts were perfectly legal for a Jewish person to eat.
So he wasn't breaking any rules there.
Not at all. But the critical theological signaling is actually happening with his wardrobe. The camel hair and the leather belt represent a highly deliberate visual echo.
A visual echo.
Yes, he is essentially doing a direct cosplay of the ancient prophet Elijah, who is described with those exact sartorial details in 2 Kings 1.8.
And for a first century audience, that visual connection would be instantaneous.
Absolutely immediate.
Because the historical context here is that the nation had experienced roughly 400 years of prophetic silence. No major prophets had emerged since Malachi.
A long, long silence.
So by adopting Elijah's specific uniform, John is visually shouting that the centuries of silence are over. And here's where it gets really interesting.
His message.
Exactly. His spoken message matches the radical nature of his appearance. He's preaching a baptism of repentance, and the original Greek word utilized in the text is metanoia.
The term metanoia carries immense weight. In contemporary English, we've kind of diluted the word repent. We think it means feeling a sense of guilt or just saying sorry for a mistake.
Right, just apologizing.
But in the Greco-Roman and Jewish contexts, metanoia demands a comprehensive structural change. It literally translates to a complete change of mentality.
A U-turn.
Yes, a fundamental 180-degree U-turn in a person's lifestyle and worldview. John is not advocating for minor behavioral tweaks. He is calling for a total reorientation of the human heart.
And the physical manifestation of this metanoia is the ritual of baptism. The Holman and NAA notes describe massive crowds leaving the urban center of Jerusalem and flocking out to the Jordan River.
Throngs of people.
Right, and they are being fully submerged in the water by John, symbolizing the washing away of the old life and passing from death to life. But
there's a big but here.
Yes. Applying this specific ritual to born and raised Jews created massive cultural friction.
Because baptism was historically reserved almost exclusively for Gentiles.
Right, for outsiders converting to Judaism. So for John to demand that genetically pure Jews get into the river, it must have been seen as a profound theological insult to their religious pride.
It was a monumental disruption of the cultural hierarchy. In their established system, immersion in water was how a pagan outsider achieved ritual purity to join the covenant community. A born and raised Jewish person was already considered part of the covenant.
Just by birthright.
Exactly, by ancestry. For John to stand in the Jordan and tell the Jewish population they needed the exact same cleansing ritual as an outsider, he was stripping away all their inherited religious privilege.
Basically telling them their lineage wasn't enough to save them.
He leveled the playing field entirely, which was deeply offensive to the religious establishment.
And that sets up this highly volatile confrontation when the establishment VIPs actually arrive at the river.
The Pharisees and Sadducees.
Right. The Pharisees being the meticulous, popular, strict traditionalists, and the Sadducees representing the wealthy, aristocratic priests who aligned with Rome. These are the undisputed power brokers of the era.
The cultural elite.
And John sees them approaching and publicly calls them a brood of vipers, trying to flee from the coming wrath.
The hostility of that interaction is staggering when you think about the social dynamics. These factions controlled the religious and political life of Judea, yet John publicly humiliates them.
He tells them the axe is already at the root of the trees.
Impending divine judgment, meaning any institution that fails to produce the actual fruit of metanoia will be cut down, regardless of their societal status.
And he specifically targets their genealogical pride. He tells them not to rely on having Abraham as their father. He claims God can raise up children for Abraham out of the stones on the riverbank.
And this is where John uses a brilliant Aramaic play on words.
Oh, right. The study notes highlight this.
The linguistic construction is so sharp. In Aramaic, the primary spoken language there, the word for son is ben, and the word for stone is eben.
Ben and even.
Exactly. John is pointing to the lifeless rocks around the Jordan and saying God can effortlessly transform even into ben. It's a poetic, cutting warning.
Warning them about the inclusion of Gentiles into God's kingdom, too.
Right, that God is not constrained by biological lineage. He completely dismantles their arrogant security.
So the tension in the desert is at an absolute peak. And right at the zenith of this movement, the text introduces Jesus arriving at the Jordan River.
The climax of the narrative.
Historically, the study notes say the exact location is debated. Could be Qasr el-Yahud on the west bank or Bethany on the east bank. But either way, Jesus approaches John and requests to be baptized. And John tries to stop him.
Which is entirely consistent with his theology. John recognizes Jesus, who the text presents as sinless, and John's baptism is strictly for repentance.
Right.
So he views baptizing a sinless superior as a theological paradox.
Which raises an important question.
Yes, this raises an important question. Why does Jesus do it? If the ritual is exclusively for those expressing metanoia, what is the justification for Jesus wading into the water?
Well, Jesus tells John it is to fulfill all righteousness.
And the study notes really unpack the layers of that phrase. Primarily, it marks the official inauguration of his public ministry. He's obeying the Father.
Stepping onto the historical stage.
Exactly. But on a deeper level, the text portrays Jesus radically identifying with the broken, repentant humanity he came to save.
Standing shoulder to shoulder with them.
He has no sin, yet he places himself in the muddy waters alongside the marginalized, the tax collectors, the outcasts. It is a profound demonstration of solidarity.
And then the moment Jesus emerges from the water, it turns into this cinematic climax. The text describes the heavens literally tearing open and the Spirit descending like a dove.
The dove imagery is so rich, it immediately connects to Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, where the Spirit is hovering over the original creation waters.
Right, creation motifs.
And the study materials also point out that texts from Qumran and the Jewish Talmud associate the Spirit of God with a dove. It signifies a definitive rupture in history.
A new creation is being initiated right there in the river.
A new era is commencing.
And accompanying this visual is an auditory one, a mashup voice from heaven. And looking at the specific words spoken brings us right back to the inspired interpreter concept from part 1.
It really does.
Because Matthew's account records the voice stating, "This is my beloved son," framing it as a public address to the crowd. But Mark and Luke record it as, "You are my beloved son," addressing Jesus directly.
The core message is identical, but the authors shaped the delivery for their narrative focus.
Exactly. But the content of that declaration is incredible.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that phrase from the heavenly voice operates as a genius theological mashup. It fuses two historically separate concepts into a single identity.
Okay, break that down for us.
The first part, "This is my beloved son," is drawn directly from Psalm 2, verse 7. That is an ancient royal coronation song. It was used when a conquering king of Israel ascended to the throne.
Establishing him as the ultimate king.
Right. But the second half completely subverts that expectation. In whom I am well pleased is a direct quotation from Isaiah 42, verse 1.
The suffering servant.
Exactly. A figure described not as a military conqueror, but a humble servant who will be crushed for the people's sins. By splicing Psalm 2 and Isaiah 42 together, the text declares Jesus is simultaneously the ultimate king and the ultimate servant.
So what does this all mean? We've gone through ancient journalistic practices, Aramaic linguistic poetry, the fusion of prophecies. How do we synthesize this deep dive?
Well, this isn't just ancient Baravia. It's really a masterclass in how to read historical texts. Recognizing that these authors were inspired interpreters who curated their timelines allows for a much richer reading.
You appreciate their literary choices.
Yes. And more importantly, it's a profound challenge to surface-level religion. John the Baptist made it crystal clear that inherited status or outward rituals mean nothing without genuine internal transformation.
A U-turn of the heart.
Exactly. Genuine transformation over performative compliance.
That actually leads perfectly to a final provocative thought I want to leave you with, to mull over.
All right.
If the ultimate king of the universe began his victorious reign not on a throne, but by wading into a muddy river to stand shoulder to shoulder with confessing sinners, what does that completely upend about our modern definitions of power, leadership, and status?
That completely flips everything upside down.
It really does change the way you look at leadership. Thank you for joining us as we unpacked all of this today. We hope it gave you a new lens for your own reading. And until next time, God blesses all of you. Take care.